What is up, YouTube? What is going on, fellow fantasy people? And of course, what is up, the Catch fam? What is up, Steven? Steven is in the house. You already know what time it is, man. We are rolling into our wide receiver rankings, part 2. What's up, Steven? How's it going, man?
It's going good, man. Can't wait until breaking into the 13 to 24 here. This is like neck and neck with everybody, especially the first two guys we're going to be talking about.
You've been waiting for this one, man.
And this is where I think both of us really get a large portion of our wide receivers because we are so running back heavy. I feel like this is where we take our wide receiver one, and I'm staying with that strategy again this year too because it's loaded this year.
Yeah, a lot of good receivers to talk about tonight, and a lot of them present pretty similar value overall.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I think it's actually smart to just say before we kick this off, like after this video, I want to get y'all's reaction. Let us know who you think should have been on this list, because even before doing the podcast here, I mean, John and I were just talking about how the 25, 26, 27 guys are so good and could easily be closer to a top 12 ranking. So let us know what your thoughts are.
All right, let's hop right into it, man. So let's just go ahead and kick this off, right? So both of our number 13 ranked wide receivers is going to be that of Mike Evans, and then 14th overall, we both got Chris Godwin. So both the Tampa Bay Bucks are going to kind of kick off tonight's conversation. Let's go ahead and hop into Mike Evans. I mean, there's a lot to say about both of these players, and they are, they're obviously both on the same team, right? And they both present a lot of fantasy value, but kind of present fantasy value in a different way. I mean, Mike Evans is more of your red zone guy, and Chris Godwin's going to be more of a PPR value. And I've got Evans ahead of Godwin. I mean, I've been a little bit higher on Evans throughout this offseason. I mean, especially in standard scoring leagues, this is a guy you're going to want, with those 14 touchdowns last year. I mean, wide receiver 10 on the year last year. So let's just stick to Mike Evans to kick things off here. I mean, so Tom Brady's first season in Tampa Bay last year, we saw him show a lot of trust in that of Mike Evans, right? I mean, 70 receptions last year, just over 1,000 receiving yards. So
it's his lowest yards ever. He barely cracked that 1,000-yard total, but he's been doing it every year of his career.
Yeah, but and it's my mistake, 13 touchdowns last season. But
yeah,
nonetheless, the most touchdowns he's ever scored in his career. And I just think that that's got to continue, right? And I think that, the lesser amount of receptions, receiving yards obviously balances out with those touchdowns and those scores. And I mean, overall, you just saw it last year between Tom Brady and Mike Evans. So I feel a little bit more confident overall in that of Mike Evans. But God, Chris Godwin's so good too. It's such a hard conversation to just talk about one of these guys and not talk about the other.
Yeah, and I think, it's a beautiful point there. And I mean, I think at the end of the day too, this also just gives even more of a conviction in Tom Brady this year because he gets a throw to both of them. These two are top 12 type of wide receivers in talent and skill. But I think the thing with Mike Evans and why I've risen on him over the offseason is really just going back, watching tape and thinking about some of the games last year, especially in the playoffs, and seeing how Tom Brady relied on him so heavily. And especially towards the red zone, which is, where everything matters. I think that really does carry a significant weight when going into next season and how to think about these two wide receivers, which are, so closely ranked. And that's what really pushed him over the edge. Mike Evans, 13 touchdowns last year. And we talk about the PPR value with Chris Godwin. And while I think that does, that is an accurate thing to say, Mike Evans is still seeing over 100 targets a year, and still pulls in 70 to 80 grabs a year. He just ends up scoring more touchdowns, and historically has had a lot of yards too that follows through with that. I think going into next year too, we can expect that this is probably going to be the guy who leads the team in receiving touchdowns. And again, he really establishes a deep connection with Tom Brady. And not to add any sort of cons or any things to worry about with Chris Godwin, because we're going to be talking about him next, and we're both extremely high on him. But things that I do worry about is that there are a lot of other PPR type of receivers that can really do the short to intermediate type of routes. Antonio Brown, who has, for some reason, is Tom Brady's best friend, lived with the guy for a while. You've also got Tyler Johnston, who showed extreme promise as a rookie. I mean, you could keep going on and on and on about the amount of intermediate to short route type of receivers they have that might eat into Chris Godwin's touches. But even more than that, too, you've also got Chris Godwin who's hurt, didn't get it as much time proving, he can do it to Tom Brady. Whereas on Mike Evans, he's the clear-cut number one deep threat on this team, and he's done his whole career. So I think he's got a very, very established role on one of the best offenses in the year next year, and an offense that we both think could have an MVP quarterback.
Absolutely. And we might as well just talk about Chris Godwin while we're here, right? I mean, you already mentioned it. I mean, he missed 4 games last year. Overall, finished as, on average, wide receiver number 32 last year. So that's a pretty big disparity between him and Mike Evans, who Mike Evans finished 10th overall on average last year. But, I mean, obviously the 4 games missed affected that, right? But, even in 2019, we saw him, kind of his breakout year.
He ripped it up in 19, yeah. He
missed 2 games that year as well, right? So, I mean, you just have to hope that he stays fully healthy because, like you also mentioned, there's so many other targets in this offense overall. And I think Antonio Brown is going to have a really good year, especially from a PPR standpoint. I mean, I'm even looking at AB as like a top 30 guy in my personal rankings. I just think, and especially where you can draft him, but that's another story for another night, right? But I'm just a little bit hesitant about Chris Godwin, but nonetheless, I think if the price is right, I mean, this is a guy in some drafts that will slip somewhat. And at the end of the day, like you mentioned as well, he is on what's going to be an extremely explosive offense overall. I mean, they have a relatively difficult strength of schedule, around 22nd overall. But it doesn't matter.
That at all.
No. I completely agree. 100% agree. And that's the other advantage of having so many targets, right? Is the strength of schedule doesn't really matter because at least 2 of these guys are going to go out every week and eat. So,
and I mean, I don't know. I want to know what you feel on this point too, because earlier on in the off season when we did our NFC South podcast, I talked about how I thought that Chris Godwin was actually the more talented wide receiver at this stage in their careers. I don't know how you feel about that. I think they are 2 different type of receivers, but the season that Chris Godwin put up in 2019. With missing 2 games, I mean, 1,300 yards receiving, 9 receiving touchdowns. I mean, that guy was poised to be like a top 2 wide receiver in the league, and a lot of draft experts were kind of valuing him like that. So a little bit disappointing 2020 season, of course, when he goes from Jameis Winston to Tom Brady. But I think if Chris Godwin can get fully healthy, the reason being why he's ranked so high for both of us is basically because this guy's an absolute dog.
Hey, I mean, 3 seasons ago, Mike Evans had over 1,500 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I might just be a bigger Mike Evans fan overall. I mean, I think obviously the age has some people a little bit hesitant with Mike Evans. Chris Godwin is a lot younger, has a lot more time left in the league, but really,
what's your conviction in Chris Godwin then? What's your standby statement if somebody asks you about it? Because I think you do go Mike Evans typically in a draft, and they're going right next to each other in drafts, not just our rankings. But what's your conviction in them?
At the end of the day, you're getting a wide receiver 1 on the Tampa Bay Bucks because I really view both of these guys like a wide receiver 1. There's very few, receiver cores out there where I really view both guys, and we'll talk about 1 or 2 other examples, but where tonight that is, but where I really view both guys pretty equal in terms of fantasy value, right? And I think at the end of the day, you're adding a tremendous value to your fantasy roster, regardless of which one of these guys you go out and get. I just have a little bit more conviction overall in that of Mike Evans. But,
hey, Chris Godwin's still projected over 1,000 yards, close to 8 touchdowns receiving. I mean, that's definitely somebody you'd want in your squad in this tier of receivers for sure.
But not to go on this tangent again, but a lot of projections, they've got Antonio Brown right around the same
Yeah.
numbers. Maybe two less scores, but right around the same numbers in terms of receiving yards. So it's like uh, part of my draft strategy more entails skipping both of these guys and waiting for Antonio Brown later on. But
Yeah.
I will say, if you need a wide receiver one, if you went RB heavy, if you went out and got a QB and or tight end, and it gets to the point where you have no receivers on your roster, and one of these
Mhm.
guys is sitting there, especially that at Chris Godwin, it's as valuable as a pick as you're going to get in your whole draft. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think a general conclusion out of here is that you could take a discounted Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown deeper in the draft, and he's
sure,
super super undervalued. But at the end of the day, too, if you're waiting and you end up getting a Chris Godwin, somehow Mike Evans in the fourth round or something, I mean, that's a steal. So, I
absolutely,
mean, having this guy as your wide receiver one, whether it be Mike Evans, whether it be Chris Godwin, you're getting two extremely talented receivers that are a part of the best offense in the league. I mean, so I've seen some people who have stacked up the two of them, and it's worked out well for them because they're probably both going to eat.
sure.
That's not what we're recommending here necessarily, but I mean, do as you wish. It's an embarrassment of riches with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers
Sure.
have.
I mean, especially if you can go out and get Brady later on and just
Yeah.
take advantage of all those points every week, right? So,
Mhm.
all right, let's move along. This is where things start to get really dicey and
Yeah.
maybe a little confusing, right? Because a lot of these guys are so similar in fantasy value, and we have a lot of the same players ranked, but kind of in different spots. So I'm going to let you move on to your third ranked receiver, and that of Amari Cooper, who I have ranked 20th overall. Um, and I'm actually surprised that you put
Yeah.
Coop this low because
Yeah.
not because I have him further back, but I just feel like hasn't been a player that you've been big on
I,
fantasy
I
wise. So I'm
I'm so
interested.
glad I'm so glad you said that because just looking at my rankings too before I'm about to go and defend this guy, it's kind of funny because in every year prior to this, I've hated on him. You had him last year,
I
and
did.
I shitted on you. I was like, dude, you got Amari Cooper, he's ever gonna play for you. But what happened at the end of the day when you look back at his stats, the guy was
Yeah.
still a baller, still
Yeah.
performed, still was one of the best receivers. And I think that's what you're getting with Amari Cooper is you're getting one of the best, most talented receivers in the league, and now coupled with Dak Prescott, hopefully healthy for the entire season. When you look at CeeDee Lamb and you look at Amari Cooper, I actually would say I think Amari Cooper is the wide receiver one. But the
Sure.
reason I have CeeDee Lamb higher is because I think Amari Cooper, his injury history has been so long, and he does it all the time. He gets hurt, and I just think CeeDee Lamb is just going to end up proving to be the more consistent guy. But both these dudes are absolute ballers, man.
Sure.
And Amari Cooper getting paired up with Dak Prescott, I can see the deep balls happening left and right. He's projected 1,100, actually close to 1,200 yards receiving with 7 touchdowns. I mean, I want a part of that. And I want a lot
Sure.
of parts of this Cowboys offense, which is why
Yeah.
CD and him are so close together. Very similar to a Mike Evans, Chris Godwin situation. I just think that if Amari Cooper's healthy for the entire season, I mean, I think he's top 10 type of talent. That's the
Sure.
difference. I think he's way more talented than Chris Godwin and Mike Evans.
It is crazy. I mean, the last 2 years he's actually been fully healthy. And then even
But with an asterisk.
yeah, and then in 2018, technically he only missed one game. In 2017, technically he only missed 2 games, right? So, but he's always one of those players who just seems to be has that Q next to his name week
Mhm.
after week, questionable, right?
Similar to Mike Williams. He's always got
Yeah,
some sort of in and out type of
yeah.
injury.
He definitely makes you worry as a fantasy owner.
Yeah.
I like Amari Cooper a whole lot. The reason I have him ranked just a little bit lower on my personal
A
rankings.
lot lower.
Sure, sure. Steven's offended by where I have Amari Cooper ranked. The strength of schedule is a big part of it for me.
Mhm.
I also think that we're going to see a lot more of Amari Cooper taking the the most
Actually,
well, no, the most difficult parts of the defense are going to be
okay.
shifted to Amari Cooper, and that's another reason why I have CeeDee Lamb higher because I think CeeDee Lamb's going to
Mhm.
you know get the advantage of that, right? By not
Mm.
having the top defender on him the whole time. But it's going to be interesting to see how opposing defenses line up against these guys because you've got Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. You've got Zeke in there. Blake Jarwin has shown some flashes. Imagine if they have someone who we're not aware of step up as well, right? But
They will. They will.
sure,
It's just so loaded, man.
sure. But I mean, yeah, 31st overall strength of schedule. Um, I don't know. And I think maybe because I had him last year, and he had a great year last year. I mean, I don't really have anything bad to say about him, but I
Mhm.
guess for me, I just don't want to go out and make him my wide receiver 2 because that's kind of where you're looking for the most part. But he was still wide receiver 16 on average on the year last year. So um,
Yeah.
those are my main reasons for having him a little bit lower, but I don't really have anything bad to say about him either. I think he's an exceptional wide receiver 2 to add to your roster. And I think, like you said, the Cowboys are going to have a great offensive season. And
Mhm.
there's nothing wrong with wanting part of that, just like wanting part of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So,
Yeah, I think that's something it's been a general theme of this podcast from the very beginning that we identify kind of our top five offenses and we talk about how we want a piece of it, kind of regardless of who the name is. It's more about wanting a piece of it. So
sure.
you talk about how Amari Cooper is like a wide receiver 2, maybe on your team. Honestly, if I get Amari Cooper as a wide receiver 2, we kind of stack it up with some running backs. I'd be pretty happy with that.
Sure.
But you know what? We did our running back ranking videos the other day, and we talked so much about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and injuries happen, right? Well, Amari Cooper's hurt right now too. I mean, hopefully he's going to get some preseason time, but monitor that injury when you're watching this video and just know that rankings adjust quickly because
Sure.
if that ended up kind of leading into week 1, obviously I'm not taking him in my draft.
Sure. I think they'll rest him. I think he'll be ready to go.
I hope,
He's
hopefully.
been pretty quiet in Hard Knocks. He's not
No.
really
And CeeDee
so
Lamb's been pretty loud. CeeDee
yeah,
Lamb's been
sure.
pretty loud,
I
pretty
think
loud.
Coop's one of those guys who kind of plays quiet though. He's not
Mhm.
really a flashy guy. So, but we'll see
Alabama,
nonetheless.
stud,
Yeah,
man.
man.
He
Yeah.
was a killer.
So for me, 15th overall, I've got Tyler Lockett, who you do have ranked a little bit
Mhm.
further ahead, but you do have him in, this rankings video. So I'll go ahead and break down Tyler Lockett since I'm such a big fan of
I
the
love him
Seattle
too, man.
Seahawks
Yeah,
wide
you are, dude. You
receivers.
want every little piece of that offense.
I will say I would have a lot of trouble going out and drafting both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Um,
Mhm.
and if you're not big on DK like I am, then I think it's a great strategy to go out and target Tyler Lockett because when you're evaluating him as a fantasy player, I mean, overall, on average last year, this is your wide receiver 9, right? So
Mhm.
certainly a lot of value to Tyler Lockett's name, but we went over this pretty in depth
Yeah.
in our last or in our latest podcast, right? Uh, he definitely scored a lot of his fantasy points between 2 games, right? And he had a pretty bad finish to the season. Like week 12 through week 17, his best performance was 9.3 points on average,
Yeah,
right?
he was on my team,
Yeah.
and that was awful because every week I had to start him too. Like I didn't
Yeah,
want
you
to miss
can't
out
sit
on
him.
this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't sit that, and that's a problem when the guy's that good, but he's not actually doing it.
Sure. But he is a great receiver.
Yeah,
I mean, 10 touchdowns last year, 8 touchdowns 2019, 10 touchdowns 2018. Uh, Russell Wilson loves this guy. The Seahawks went out and paid him early. Um, Once again, the Seahawks have a very difficult strength of schedule at all positions offensively, including wide receivers. They're looking at about the 26th most difficult schedule. So I can understand being a little bit hesitant of Tyler Lockett, between the factors of really how he put up his fantasy points last year, the strength of schedule, all the different things, right? But nonetheless, you've got to look at his value overall and make him part of your draft board. And similar to Amari Cooper, I think he's a phenomenal wide receiver 2 to have on your team.
they're similar wide receivers. They
Yeah, I
are.
would agree.
I like that comparison a lot because
Yeah,
I think they both give a lot of value, but that inconsistency is definitely something that tags along with their name.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say. I mean, I think he should be part of your draft board,
Mhm.
without a doubt. And obviously, in our NFC West podcast, we got pretty deep into the Seahawks, but overall, I
Yeah.
mean, have him on your draft board. But I wouldn't be comfortable with Tyler Lockett being my wide receiver number one. Now, if it came down to it, don't get me wrong. I think he's probably going to be more valuable than some of the other guys sitting there. But just be a little leery overall, of that of
Yeah.
Tyler Lockett.
I think we did. We really, not to harp on this, but we comprehensively kind of broke down the Seahawks and Tyler Lockett in our NFC West video. But I think a big push for me with Lockett and why I actually have kind of waited on DK Metcalf and settled for a guy like Lockett is I think the offense is going to change a little bit and they're going to put more of a focus on getting those short to intermediate routes a bigger part of their offense,
Yeah.
which favors Lockett and does not favor DK Metcalf, who has made his career, whether it be collegiate or in the NFL, out of the deep ball, and because he's so damn good at it. But I think Tyler comes in here. And I think he has a more consistent year next year. He probably puts up less of those like crazy, games where he has like 50 points in one game or whatever. But I think he gives you a more level floor.
Sure.
And with the opportunity, obviously, of getting that ceiling play because he's got Russell Wilson at quarterback.
Sure.
But where I would love to have Lockett is like if I could get him as a flex play every
Oh
week.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, like and I think you can because he kind of goes around like where Hawkinson would go, right? So it depends on how you're viewing the tight end position as well, because I think that's where a lot of people are making that, value type of play right there. But if I could get two starting running backs, two starting receivers, and then have the upside of a Lockett where he goes bananas and wins
Sure.
you the game, or he gives you, I think, again, a higher floor because I
Sure.
think we both think he's going to have a better year than he did last year.
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah,
disagree with that. But you guys know, I mean, DK is my boy, so I don't
yeah,
really
yeah. I
have
know
any
you're not
reason.
you're not going to shed any hate on DK, but hey, let's talk about a guy with a similar build as DK. My guy right here,
Okay.
Julio
Okay.
Jones.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got Julio. We're going to put this out there. I mean, I've got Julio ranked 17th. Robert Woods is my 16th ranked receiver, who's your 17th ranked receiver. So very similar still in the rankings, but
Mhm.
you've got Julio just a spot ahead of me. So if you want, floor is yours to crack into Julio here.
Yeah, so I think Julio Jones here, especially actually with recent news coming out about AJ Brown being hurt, I mean, he's got even more of an opportunity here to become the guy again in Tennessee. He was the guy in Atlanta. A lot of people are like, okay, maybe he's just going to be this number two guy on an offense that doesn't really focus a ton on the run game or on the pass game. But here we go. We got Ryan Tannehill, maybe a
Yeah.
sleeper MVP pick right here, especially in your in your fantasy football leagues because of where you can get him. But Julio Jones, I mean, let's not get twisted, man. Stephon Diggs just came out recently and said he's the best of our generation, and I can't agree with that even more, dude. I mean,
Sure.
this guy is everything you want in your wide receiver. He's big, he's fast, he's tall, he can catch anything. He can beat the hell out of a defender trying to tackle him. I mean, you guys see it on the tape, but the thing is, I think a lot of people are knocking Julio recently, saying he's kind of dusted in a way. He's injured. He's kind of past his peak. Man, do you see that? Because I don't see that. I just see a guy who had a little bit of injury history last year, and
Yeah.
now we're thinking that AJ
Well,
Brown's the clear number one. And it's like, I think they're pretty similar, to be honest.
I mean, a big part of it as well is sure, he missed 9 games last year, right? But
Hmm.
why would he push himself to potentially get injured in such a losing team last year that was obviously, in the talks of wanting to get rid of veteran players and kind of
Yeah.
start a rebuild, fired their head coach, et cetera, right? And when you look at what he did when he played last year, in games that he played 100% in, other than Week 11 against New Orleans, he had 12 or more fantasy points.
It's
And
really
it's
good.
yeah, uh, and outside of that, when you looked at if you go back and look at rankings from last year heading into the season, this was still like a top 10 wide receiver, and just to drop him out of that conversation completely because he didn't play that much last year is definitely not fair. I mean, don't get
Hmm.
me wrong. He finished as wide receiver 53 last year, but like we just said, he missed 8 games as well, right?
Hmm.
Um, and overall, I think if anything, he's primed to have a better year, if not one of the best years of his career. I mean, he's got
It's
everything.
finally not going to be triple covered.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And he's got
Yeah.
everything stacked against him. I think Ryan Tannehill, you could argue, is better than Matt Ryan as a
More
passer.
efficient. More
Sure,
efficient.
and it's no knock on Matt Ryan, right?
Mm-mm.
But yeah, man, I like Julio as a wide receiver one. If you go
Yeah.
like RB heavy, tight end, QB, and Julio's sitting there, why the hell would you not take
Yeah,
him as your
dude.
wide
Yeah.
receiver one, man?
Even you
Uh,
saying that just kind of gets me excited, dude.
and
Like,
like,
cause that is nice.
he's never had more than 8 touchdowns in a season, but he doesn't need them, man. I mean,
Hmm.
this is a guy who's put up, I mean, some of the most insane games in history from a receiving standpoint. He doesn't need the touchdowns, right? And there's really no other fantasy player I can really think of who I'm confident in saying, I don't care if he doesn't score touchdowns, right? But yeah, I completely agree with you, man.
With that point, though, I mean, we can't just say he's not going to get those touchdowns here in an
Sure,
offense that actually targets the receiver position a ton in the red zone. I
sure.
mean, so if we could see Julio Jones just with touchdown upside,
Yeah,
like that's game breaking type of shit right there. That's like something we ain't ever even touched the surface of that yet.
sure.
Um, but also too, I mean, I think we talked about it too in the AFC South video, the first video we've ever done, is that we both maybe see Julio as being kind of the PPR guy here. Obviously now AJ Brown's hurt, so that kind of even adds a little bit more fuel to that fire. But
Sure.
I've had AJ Brown in previous seasons. AJ Brown is one of those guys you have him and he has like one or two catches and he gives you 18 points, but Julio Jones could be Ryan Tannehill's guy. They could build a
Oh yeah.
chemistry quick and early. I mean, I really see that maybe early on, Julio just gets in the room, takes that commanding presence, and then he's just the go-to guy for the whole season.
Yeah, I think at the very least, you just can't write him off. I mean, this is a Hall of Fame player who, like I said, has everything stacked against him. And
Hmm.
when great, and not even football players, when great athletes in professional sporting leagues have everything stacked against them, they're in their 10th or 11th or 14th year. Sometimes that's when we see them perform their best in their
Yeah,
entire or entire career, right? And I'm not ready to write Julio off whatsoever, man.
no,
No
I
way
don't think either of
whatsoever.
us are.
Sure, yeah. All right, let's hop and move right along. Let's see who we got next. So yeah, my
Bobby
16th,
Woods, baby.
yeah, my 16th ranked receiver is Robert Woods, who I feel like you take every year in fantasy.
I do.
Yeah, 13th overall wide receiver on average last year. I think he's going to highly benefit from the addition of Matthew Stafford. I think that, when you're looking at both that of Cooper Kupp, who I've got ranked 18th overall, and you've got ranked 20th overall, I like both of these guys a lot, but I, at the moment, am viewing Robert Woods as the more likely candidate to be a wide receiver one on this team.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, for the most part, yeah, it's just a gut feeling. It's just something that I have. But nonetheless, man, they have the sixth easiest schedule.
That's that's
And
nice. That's really
yeah,
nice. Yeah.
from a fantasy standpoint, and Stafford is going to feed both of these guys. And I think Robert Woods has the ability to kind of, he plays more. I guess what I'm trying to get at is Cooper Kupp plays better in the slot, right? And
Hmm.
Robert Woods could play in the slot too. Don't get me wrong, right? But uh, on average, I mean, this guy is getting around. I mean, 90 receptions the last 2 years. 2018, he had 86 receptions. So he's basically a lock for 90 plus receptions this year as long as he stays healthy. And he's another guy who I don't really care if he gets the touchdowns or not. This is a PPR value all day, and I think he's going to have a phenomenal year. And he's another guy, if you went RB heavy or maybe got a tight end or a QB early, and you have a hole at the wide receiver position, if he's sitting there, this is a great fantasy value, man, for a wide receiver number one.
Yeah. No, I mean it's. I'm glad you said that. That I always pick him up
Yeah,
because you identified the exact scenario that always happens. I go super running back heavy, got a whole receiver. I'm like, all right, I'm taking Robert Woods because he's consistent and he
sure.
gives you the same floor every week. And last year was a little bit different because he ended up giving you something he hasn't given you in a long time, which is touchdowns. And I think that's going to carry over next year because
Sure.
one of the things that made me put Robert Woods above Cooper Kupp, which again, like I'm not trying to dive too deep into Cooper because we both got him later too, but I think Cooper Kupp's like kind of showing some signs of injury, right? So I mean, he's not played all the seasons in his career. He's had some injury histories throughout his career, and also Cooper Kupp had a deep connection with Jared Goff. And while I think they upgraded at the quarterback position, I do think connection makes a big deal when we're talking about receivers and quarterbacks. So with Robert Woods, I think you're coming in with a clean slate with Matt Stafford. And I think both of these guys are going to eat regardless. But I just think that Robert Woods is very versatile player. He can play outside, he can play inside, like you said, but he also presents a pretty good running offense too. I mean, he does jet sweeps. He goes out the backfield. He just does everything. And what that shows to me is not only that he's versatile and high skilled, but that Sean McVay wants him at every single part of this offense.
Yeah.
And I mean, we just saw today, this running back position is so effed up right now. I mean, Henderson's down, our guy, man. We just lauded him on our, dude. We just fucking hyped him up. But I mean, they just traded for Sony Michel, but it's like I could see them working Robert Woods out of the backfield a little bit or doing some stuff like that because Sean McVay gets crazy with it.
I mean, 2 rushing touchdowns last year, a rushing touchdown in 2019 and 2018. So, I think Sean McVay loves Robert Woods, and I don't have enough good things to say about Robert Woods. I mean, really kind of an underdog type receiver, and I can certainly see him coming out this year at least 90 receptions, probably more in my opinion, and closer to 11 to 1,200 receiving yards. And I think I want to make a bold prediction. I think this is kind of like what you alluded to. I think this is a season where he has the most touchdowns he's ever had in his career. So once again, a great value similar to Julio Jones, a guy who's slipping in fantasy drafts. But don't be upset if this is your wide receiver number 1 on your fantasy roster. So just talking about him, I'm like, gosh, I kind of want to move Robert Woods a little bit higher up on my board. But
that's the one thing, though. I'm pretty sure you can get Robert Woods before getting Cooper Kupp. So that's the one thing,
Sure. Well, let's go ahead. Let's talk about Cooper Kupp because I've got him ranked 18th overall. Your 18th ranked receiver was that of Tyler Lockett. So a lot of similarities in our rankings here, but just a little, a couple of spots moved around. But let's talk about Cooper Kupp a bit, who I really like, and you kind of pointed out the reason why, for me personally, he's a little bit lower for me, and that's the injuries, man. And he only missed 1 game last year, but he's another one. And don't get me wrong, right? I mean, we're talking about wide receivers here. Out of all positions from a fantasy perspective, this is the position that you see the most players with a question mark next to their name in fantasy. So maybe we're being a little bit unfair, but nonetheless, that is my main concern overall with that of Cooper Kupp. But with that being said, I think he's going to have a fantastic year from a PPR standpoint. I think that Robert Woods is going to have a better year overall. But for all the reasons that I like Robert Woods this year, I like Cooper Kupp as well. And I think that he's certainly going to benefit from Matthew Stafford being there. And this is a guy in the last 2 years who's had at least 90 receptions. He didn't, in terms of receiving yards, he didn't finish where people thought he would last year. And in terms of touchdowns, he didn't finish where he thought he would last year. But still, 2 years ago, over 90 receptions, over 1,100 receiving yards, and 10 touchdowns, right? So I think that Cooper Kupp could be a really sneaky value and a fantastic wide receiver 2 or flex spot on your fantasy roster. But I would be a little leery of drafting him as a wide receiver number 1. But nonetheless, I wouldn't be too scared if this is who you end up with as your wide receiver 1, at least in full PPR leagues. So,
let me just take you back in time to that good old 8 Mile Road in Detroit, where Matt Stafford used to call that place his home, where we both thought he was going to end his career. What did Matt Stafford do his entire career in Detroit? he supported two number one type of wide receivers.
Sure.
Kenny Galladay, Marvin Jones, he had Megatron with all the hey, he had Nate Burleson, right? You know what I mean? Like our guy Nate, you know what I mean? But no, he is we should have his job.
Shout out Nate Burleson.
Yeah, shout out. Yeah, screw you. But no, I mean, my point is this, right? He just came from an offense with Marvin Jones and Kenny Galladay, and he's now stepping into a new offense with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I think this is going to be a similar type of situation here where you have a guy that you can bet on every week with between the two of them. Now with Cooper Kupp, historically, he's been the touchdown guy, and why, I've always liked him more, but I just haven't drafted him because he always used to go before Robert Woods. Robert Woods was the guy that would slip, right? So in this situation now, when I'm looking at this, right, like I'm so high on Robert Woods, we just like fell in love with the guy on this video, right? But at the end of the day, now we're seeing Cooper Kupp as the one slipping, right? So he might not slip in your personal leagues, but I'm taking the one who falls second because they could fall farther, right? And I think Cooper Kupp in this situation now is going to be a guy that's on my target board because if he comes back and he's fully healthy, which I expect him to be, we haven't had a whole lot of murmurs out of camp about him not being healthy. This is a guy who's going to probably see, again, close to 10 touchdowns. He's projected for 1,000 yards next season. I mean, let's get Cooper Kupp back to what he was doing, man, because this guy's an elite receiver.
Sure. And I think it comes down to things that we've been saying a lot in these ranking videos, right? What is your conviction overall in this Rams offense and with Matthew Stafford at the quarterback position? And the more confident you feel that Matthew Stafford's going to come out and throw for 35 to 40 touchdowns this year, then the higher these two guys, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, should be on your board because they're both going to benefit from that. And they can't both score, 20 touchdowns, right? So I think it's completely fair for you to say that Cooper Kupp can come out and have a 10 touchdown season. But I think it kind of lies with where your faith in Matthew Stafford being added to this offense is.
And I love that.
Sure.
I love it. And I love that.
Like I said, a relatively, easy schedule, 6 overall in terms of strength. So I think both of these guys are sneaky values right now. But nonetheless, let's move on to our 19th ranked receiver, who we both agree on. Someone who has, on average,
easier schedule, man.
The second easiest schedule from the wide receiver position, and that of DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers. So I like DJ Moore a lot, like a whole lot, right?
Yeah, I've risen on him quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 2 years, very consistent numbers, just under 1,200 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns. Last year, only 66 receptions. 2019, we saw him with 87 receptions overall. But nonetheless, a very consistent ceiling and floor, right? I don't think the addition of Sam Darnold really skyrockets DJ Moore's value. But that strength of schedule, the fact that he is the number one receiver in this offense, no knock on Robbie Anderson, but I view Robbie Anderson as a true number 2 receiver. Someone who I really like, who I think is a fantastic.
He just got the bag today. They just locked him up.
Another sneaky value, especially when you look at this strength of schedule, right? But in my opinion, DJ Moore is a lock as a number 1 receiver. Like I said, basically, barring any injuries, that is, guaranteed around 1,100 receiving yards and 4 to 6 touchdowns. So I think those are very good numbers, and a great fantasy number 2 fantasy receiver on your roster. If he's your wide receiver 1, if you went super RB heavy or tight end QB RB, right, I would be a little hesitant. But nonetheless, like I just said, you're basically guaranteed 60 to 80 receptions and 1,100 receiving yards and a couple touchdowns. A great fantasy value where he's being currently drafted.
Yeah, I mean, but let's just talk about the efficiency of getting 60 catches to 80 catches throughout his career and turning that into an average 1,100 to 1,200 yards receiving. I mean, this dude is an explosive lightning strike inside a bottle, dude. This guy's an absolute maniac, which is why he's been on every fantasy expert's mind over the past couple of years. And they're like, when the hell is he going to break out? Well, here's the situation, man. They just cut Samuel too. Samuel goes over to Washington football team. There's even more of an opportunity. Now, granted, they went ahead and drafted Terrence Marshall, who I think is going to be a relevant piece. I think Sam Darnold you're saying he doesn't like jack up the ceiling, but I do think he helps it. I
Sure.
think he does put DJ Moore into a situation where he can be elevated. I think he stretches the ball down the field a hell of a lot more than Teddy Bridgewater. I think we definitely both agree on that. But the thing about DJ Moore is,
I kind of like
you
I kind of like my
you
guy
like
Teddy.
Teddy, you like Teddy Two Gloves, yeah. But here's the thing about DJ, man, is I think this is one of those situations where we see an offense, we like the offense, we both really like Robbie Anderson, but I'm actually willing to jump on the wide receiver one rather than wait till the wide receiver two when it comes to the Carolina Panthers because I think I think he has a unique ability to break tiers and get closer to that top 12 than a
Sure.
lot of these guys do, and especially than Robert Anderson does.
Sure.
So I don't know, man. I'm very high on him, but at the end of the day, too, he's got to prove that he can get more touchdowns.
Sure. Yeah, and that's kind of like you alluded to. The question kind of looming over DJ Moore is when do we see that true breakout season from
Hmm.
him? And I certainly think that it could be this year. But I think, once again, his ceiling and his floor are both going to be very good. And I think he's
Yeah,
a very safe wide receiver to go out and target nonetheless. So,
we've received some negative comments when drafted him in mock
yeah.
drafts, I believe, in the past. So
Well,
I'm not too sure how the fantasy community totally views this guy now because I think he has let people down. But I mean, I'm here to stand in cement, man. Like I do think DJ Moore has a good year next year.
I agree. And I think, to be fair, with a lot of those comments and stuff, it has to do with people not having conviction in the Carolina Panthers offense being led by Sam Darnold. So I think that's fair. But I think, kind of, you also alluded to this. The guy throwing him the football in earlier seasons where he's performed well hasn't been that great either. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too worried. And I do think that Sam Darnold will have an improved year from what we've seen him do in the past. So nonetheless, let's move right along at the 20th overall spot. You've got our guy Cooper Kupp, who we just talked about, and then I've got Amari Cooper ranked 20th overall. So we've already touched on both of those guys. And look at this, we've got an agreement at the at ranking 21 with our guy Adam Thielen, who kind of reminds me of you if you were good at football. But wide receiver 8 last year, man. Wide
Yeah.
receiver 8 on average last
Hmm.
year.
Yeah.
And he is, actually on a lot of rankings around where we have him ranked 21st overall.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's fair to say that he'll see a little bit of regression with the emergence of Justin Jefferson. But I'm telling you, man, if you play in a standard scoring league, this is a guy that you need to target. I mean, this is a guy that Kirk Cousins absolutely adores in the red zone, right? And last season was Adam Thielen's best season from a scoring standpoint in his entire career. Um, and I don't know, man. I think he is a phenomenal, once again, wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. I'd be a little leery if he was my wide receiver 1, right? But overall, man, wide receiver 8 last year. Like, you can't just ignore that, in my opinion. I don't know if you have any thoughts, but
No, but I think ADP in the fantasy community is kind of ignoring it because, well, like we both acknowledge that there's going to be some serious regression at touchdowns, which is a large part of his value last year. 14 touchdowns.
yeah,
I mean, that's absolutely insane. But
yeah.
he's projected to get 9 touchdowns this year,
Yeah.
and so it's like that's still a lot. So first off, let's just say like, what's your league, right? Like, you PPR standard, because if you're standard, Adam Thielen's a beast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
PPR, I still think, I mean, we play half PPR. I think you're still getting great value out of this guy. And if he is your number two, shit, if he's your like flex receiver, that's an absolute badass because
Yeah.
while he's gonna see regression at touchdowns, let's not get it twisted. He is still Kirk Cousins' best friend when it comes to the offense, man.
Oh, yeah.
He's still his go-to guy. He still has that connection. He still has that chemistry, and especially in the red zone, man. He sees an unreal amount of targets in the red zone. Like, they are either going to give it to Dalvin Cook or it's going to Adam Thielen rather than going to Irv Smith Jr. or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of how this offense is, and I see Justin Jefferson being the big, splashy, big-name wide receiver. And then at the end of the day, you look at the stats, Adam Thielen's going to have more touchdowns. That's how
It
I see this
kind of,
going.
like, if Chris Godwin was healthy, that's kind of who I think of, right? I think of Mike Evans, similar to Adam Thielen. then I think of Justin Jefferson similar to Chris Godwin. I mean, give or take, right? There's a little bit of
Yeah.
differences there, right? But I still really like Adam Thielen this year, especially like you just said. If this is the third receiver on your team, man, you're gonna put up a lot of points from the receiver position
Yeah.
overall. But I would expect to see a little bit of regression. I mean, I certainly don't ignore the rankings from the year before and stats from the year before. Um, I always take them into consideration whether you can expect regression or expect a change in the offense, right? So, um,
It's a better team too.
yeah,
And while the defense being vastly improved might hurt the offense overall, just because they were just launching the ball deep all the time, I
sure.
still think this offense is going to be freaking lethal because I think this team is going to be really in competition for playoffs next year.
And you just got to think they are going to be in the red zone quite a bit because
Yeah,
their running back gets them there, right?
yeah,
And Justin Jefferson can stretch the field. I mean, say what you want about Kirk Cousins, but
he's
he
in my
is,
top 24, baby.
yeah, he is not a bad quarterback by any means whatsoever. So, nonetheless, let's move on. I'm going to go first for the 22nd ranked player here. I have got my guy. You've heard me talk about him all off season through all the mock drafts. I don't care what anyone says. Jerry Jeudy is my 22nd ranked wide receiver overall, especially now that as of today, August 25th, when we're recording this, we know who the starting quarterbacks for the Denver Broncos is going to be, that of Teddy Bridgewater. But nonetheless, I didn't really care who the starting quarterback was going to be. These guys overall have such an easy strength of schedule. You just
Mhm.
can't ignore it from all positions. Uh, from a fantasy perspective, it's such an easy strength of schedule. I mean, seventh overall for the receivers, right? But I'm just looking for this to be a breakout guy this year, right? Uh,
Definitely,
I mean, you guys have
definitely.
heard me talk about this. I did an individual video on sleeper wide receivers. When we talked about this division, I talked about Jerry Jeudy quite a bit. Uh, if Cortland Sutton comes back fully healthy, I think it helps Jerry Jeudy. I think it helps him see, weaker parts of the defenses, right? If Cortland Sutton does not come back, then I think Jerry Jeudy plays well as a wide receiver number one. Tim Patrick is still on this team to help take some
AJ
of that
Hamler.
pressure off. Yeah, there's a lot of good, I mean, tight ends are good, running backs are good.
Yeah,
I think this is a sneaky team overall, but Jerry Judy's just one of those guys that I want to go out and get. And I really don't care what anyone says about it. If I'm wrong at the end of the year, we'll find out. But I have a strong feeling that I'm going to be right on this one. Um, and what's kind of interesting? The numbers aren't too entirely close overall, but they're close enough that I want to go out. I want to put this out there, right? Rookie receivers last year, right? Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb, not that far apart statistically, right? And I can see both of them having like prime breakout years, right?
yeah,
CeeDee Lamb had a better year last year. Don't get me wrong, right? He had more receptions, more receiving yards, and more touchdowns. But when you stack these two guys up against each other, they're relatively similar in terms of stats, right? And
hmm
I think that even with the quarterback injuries to the Cowboys last year, that CeeDee Lamb was probably on a better team overall, right?
yeah.
But
Even without Dak, they were
yeah,
better. I
yeah.
mean, didn't have fucking Dak and Drew Lock throwing you the ball. Shit.
I'm still really sad that Drew Lock didn't get the starting job.
Oh my gosh,
I wanted to,
he's still dancing. He's still dancing somewhere for
but
sure.
I do think that Teddy Bridgewater is probably
Oh my gosh.
realistically the better quarterback. And if you have any knock on Teddy Bridgewater as a quarterback, look at the way that DJ Moore performed last year, that Curtis
Robbie
Samuel
Anderson.
performed last year, and that Robbie Anderson performed last year.
hmm
Um, and man, I'm telling you, if I go out in deeper leagues, like my 20-man league, 14 plus man leagues, and Jerry Jeudy is my wide receiver one, I'm fine with it. And 12 or lesser leagues, this is my wide receiver two. If anyone else takes Jerry Jeudy in any of my fantasy leagues, I will never play fantasy again.
You know what I thought about all day today was actually that exact thing.
Yeah.
After they named Teddy Bridgewater, I was like, where the hell can I get this guy?
Yeah.
Where can I get Jeudy? So I know John won't get him
Yeah.
because I know you're so high on him. But shit, dude, so am I. Ever since listening to you on Jeudy, I've risen on this guy. And I'm looking at his projections, 992 yards, 5 touchdowns next season. That's what they're thinking. Shit, I think they're underselling the guy. Last year, he had 850 yards and 3 touchdowns. So it's like, dude, I'm seeing a major spike here because Teddy Bridgewater loves receivers like him. He has some of the sharpest route running in all of the league, hands down, no question. And Jerry Jeudy is absolutely raw. This guy coming out of Alabama was supposed to be the next generational type of talent. So, yeah, he did kind of underperform a little bit. But I think coming into next season, I could just see him being the biggest standout breakout type of player in the league, especially at the wide receiver position, because you are getting him so low. I mean, ADP like 84. I mean, this guy could easily break into the top 24. So I love your pick here. He doesn't make it into my top 24, but man, is he getting close.
That's because you're a loser, and
I'm a loser, and I'm still going to take him from you just to piss you off. So
nonetheless, man, the first 3 weeks of fantasy this year, he's seen the New York Giants, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the New York Jets.
Oh my gosh! Dude.
Don't get me wrong, man. Week 4, he sees the Ravens. Week 5, he sees Pittsburgh, right? But nonetheless, man, I think he's going to go undrafted in some smaller leagues. I think people aren't going to think twice about him, even in some deeper leagues. In those first 3 weeks, I look for him to have really good numbers, right?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, dude. As much as I like the guy, I'm not expecting like a completely crazy year, you know?
I think you've got him really well ranked with your optimism baked into it.
Sure. I like where I have him ranked, and I expect between 1,100 and 1,200 receiving yards and closer to like 6 to 8 scores, right?
Yeah.
But I think those will be great numbers overall where you can draft a guy. And you guys have heard me talk about this throughout, if you follow this channel, this whole offseason. So we can go ahead and move along. But
let's move on to my guy now, because I think he's shown a little bit more consistency. He's had a little bit longer time in the league, and he's a part of, I think, an offense that's shown some promise in the preseason, man. Yeah. Deontay Johnson with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think this is the clear-cut number 1 receiver with these guys. Last year, he was on 160 target pace, finished with around 144 targets. But this guy did have some drop issues. But shit, man, he still caught a ton of passes. He's the closest thing to Antonio Brown as this team has, and Ben Roethlisberger recognizes that. I think, he had 900 yards receiving last year and 7 touchdowns. This year, he's projected around 900 yards again, but I don't know. Ben Roethlisberger is so much better looking in preseason. I mean, I think you would agree to that. We talked a little bit sidebar about how Ben looks kind of nice. And I know he's on my top 24 rankings this year for quarterbacks, but this offense might be a little bit better than we're thinking, because it was obviously really shitty last year, but it still let guys like Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson shine. So I don't know. What are your quick thoughts on him before I dive even deeper into this dude?
I've got Deontay Johnson ranked 23rd overall, and I think it's based purely off of those targets, right? 144 targets last year, but it's really difficult to rank these Pittsburgh Steelers wide receivers. Like at a point when I first started doing these rankings, I had all 3 at the end of the rankings because I just couldn't decide, right? But I think from a PPR standpoint, we see the most value out of Deontay Johnson. And I like just at the end, very quickly took Chase Claypool out of my top 24. But I really like Chase Claypool, and I like where you can draft Juju as well. But overall, I think that Deontay Johnson is going to have the best year, barring any injuries, especially from a PPR standpoint. I look for him to improve on his overall receptions, which will lead to an improved number in terms of receiving yards. And I mean,
touchdowns. You might see more touchdowns.
Even if he only has, 6 to 8 touchdowns, which he's kind of been in that range, 5 touchdowns his rookie season, 7 touchdowns last year, I'm okay with that, right? The drops, obviously a little bit concerning, but we actually saw a fair amount of drops from the Pittsburgh Steelers receivers overall. He just had the most of them, so he
Yeah.
kind of has that looming
Because
over
he
him.
was targeted the most, right? That's why he was
Sure.
known for that. But another offseason to work on that shit, I think it improves.
Yeah, and I think there's some hesitancy because some people believe that Chase Claypool will be the receiver who has an emergent year this year,
Mhm.
and kind of is the one who's going to take that step forward. And if I'm being honest, I think both of them are going to take
Yeah.
a step forward. And I think that Juju is kind of that veteran red zone guy. There's no knock on Juju. I like Juju Smith-Schuster a lot as well, right? So yeah, I like all these guys. I like this offense this year as well. I think. Especially when you look at their defense as well, I think this team is going to be very fantasy relevant overall.
We broke down the receivers pretty comprehensively on our AFC North video and really talked about why we liked our certain guys that we liked and talked about how each receiver has a certain role.
Sure.
Nobody's necessarily a Batman and a Robin. They all play different roles. But the reason I like Deontay Johnson is because of our league setup. We're half PPR. So if you have an insane PPR value like Deontay does, I mean, those are guys that you just target. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you've got guys like Chase Claypool, who in a standard league, I'm probably taking over Deontay because he does just give you so much deep threat. And the reason I think it is important to talk a little bit more about the other receivers in this room more than we would for other guys on our rankings is just because they are somewhat synonymous with each other and they really play so much off of each other.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I stand really grounded in my opinion. I think Deontay Johnson is a top 24 receiver next year.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, if all three of these guys are sitting there, which is very, very likely, right?
Yeah.
Um, I just have the most conviction overall in Deontay Johnson in terms of getting the most well-rounded receiver, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that he does what Chase Claypool does, and he does what Juju does, just at a more moderate level, right? And then Juju
Mm-hmm.
does one thing that Chase Claypool doesn't do, and Chase Claypool does something that Juju doesn't do. So I think he's just going to end up having the most consistent year overall. And like I said, I just have the most conviction in drafting him out of those three, receivers respectively overall. So yeah. So with that, let's move to another kind of confusing team overall in terms of looking at receivers, right? So you've got Brandon Aiyuk ranked 23rd overall.
Aiyuk.
Yeah, and he's my final receiver for the night. I've got him ranked 24th overall. And once again, it's really hard to rank these 13 through 24, right? There's a couple guys here at the end, including those Steelers wide receivers, including your final ranked player of the night. You've got ranked 24th, who we'll get into next, right? But I threw Brandon Aiyuk back in my top 24 based off of a couple of things, right?
I know one of them's gonna be.
Yeah,
I
you
know
already
one of them's
know
gonna.
one
I
thing
know
I
one
look
of
at
them's
big
gonna.
time, right? Easiest strength of schedule from fantasy perspective in terms of the wide receiver position for the San Francisco 49ers receivers. So you got to look who's the guy who you see being the number one receiver in this offense, and you've got to have him on your draft board. And for me, it's Brandon Aiyuk. I mean, outside of George Kittle, right? And the tight ends line up a little bit differently with that strength of schedule, right? But I can see Brandon Aiyuk coming out and being the true wide receiver one on this team. And yeah, I want a little piece of that Niners offense.
Won
And
a lot of pieces of that on
yeah,
Niners offense.
I have more confidence in Brandon Aiyuk than that of Deebo Samuel.
Mhm.
And yeah, I
Why
think
don't you talk briefly about that before moving along to me just showing a ton of love to this guy because
yeah.
you've taken Debo in past drafts
Well,
and you've showed a lot of love to him in past drafts.
the main reason I showed a lot of love to Deebo Samuel last year in fantasy was because you could draft him. I mean, he was still injured when we were drafting last year, so you basically got a bargain deal. And did that pay off? Not really, because he didn't. He only played 7 games last
It
year,
didn't pay
right?
off at all. It didn't pay off.
Yeah, sure, but it was logical at the time.
It was logical. Yeah, it was good.
And yeah, I think with Debo, you're getting more of like they're gonna try and use him in the run game. They're gonna move him around. A very talented receiver and
Mhm.
shows very good fantasy potential when he's healthy. but he doesn't really present that wide receiver one status. And I think that's what Brandon Aiyuk does. Who had a very good rookie year. And if we're going to make the argument that Jerry Jeudy somewhat reflects that of CeeDee Lamb, well, Brandon Aiyuk statistically reflects what Jerry Jeudy did last year.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit under, I mean, more touchdowns, but less receiving yards. But nonetheless,
let me just okay. Shut you up there.
Yeah, you look ready to talk, so I'm going to let you get in here.
I'm going to talk. Brandon Aiyuk, baby. I mean, look at the amount of targets this guy had last year. Sure. Yeah, this guy had nearly 100 targets last season, and he played 12 games. Mm-hmm. He played 12 games with 100 targets.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes. Kyle Shanahan loves this guy. Let's get the ball in his hand any way we can. He runs the ball too, just like Debo does. Yeah. I'd say more effectively.
Yeah.
He catches a lot of passes. He's got his arms. I remember at the combine, they were commenting about this guy. His arms are like to the ceiling. ASU, baby. Yeah, repping ASU, dude. This guy is an absolute beast. He is actually who I marked in the 13 to 24 rankings. He's who I marked as being my breakout guy. Because this dude on this offense with this schedule, with the emergence of possibly Trey Lance jumping in here, it is going to be a fun offense to watch. Sure. And if Brandon Aiyuk can get even close to a full season, I mean, he had 100 targets last year, so let's extrapolate that out. I mean, in a lot of projections, you're seeing that he's only going to get 900 yards. Shit, he had that basically last year, so it's like, come on, give me a break, man. I think people are undervaluing this guy. Yeah. Take him in your drafts. I'm begging you to draft him because I'm going to. I'm just as convicted about Brandon Aiyuk as John is about Jerry Jeudy. Those are our guys, man. I think we can sit in stone here when we're talking about wide receivers. Shit, 1, 2, 24. Those are our guys because we love value. And I'm taking my running backs. I'm doing all that shit. And then I know I got a number one wide receiver on one of the best teams in all of football.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you capped that off perfect. I don't know if I can follow that up with anything
else. You can't follow it up, baby. Yeah. Please go to the fucking moon.
All right. So let's finish off the night with that of T. Higgins, who you've got ranked 24 too. I had in my top 24. And God, it just gets so dicey, right? And he just scooted out, mainly with me having Jerry Jeudy in there. Easily my ranked 25th guy, especially with seeing Jamar Chase really struggling in the preseason. I mean, I think
with that.
I know it's a little scary, man. But I think once again, T. Higgins presents the best value to be the number one receiver in this offense overall. Mm-hmm. I hope Jamar Chase can change that, and I hope that chemistry between Burrow and Chase shows up. But God, Jamar Chase looks like a scary fantasy draft pick, and I hate drafting rookies. But nonetheless, T. Higgins, his rookie season last year, very underrated overall. He had a fantastic year last year, 67 receptions off 108 targets, 908 receiving yards, and 6 scores overall. This was a guy on the waiver wire that I wanted so bad in every league, man. And he certainly was
I got him.
Yeah, I know. In our league, you had him. I had him in a different league. And he really came out and showed up last year. And yeah,
one of the best rookie receivers for sure.
Yeah. And like I said, I think he has the best, at the moment, the best opportunity to be the wide receiver one in the Cincinnati Bengals offense. So yeah, I'll let you get some words in since you've actually got him ranked in your 24 here.
Yeah, no, and I understand why you were maybe thinking about jumping him off, because one of the things that really kind of made me hesitant about T. Higgins was just that, like, apparently Joe Burrow has been pretty bad too. This offense is looking shaky in training camp and preseason. I mean, a little bit of lack of confidence running around there, but shit, I do think if you at least have Joe Burrow back there, it's better than what they were dealing with last season. And T. Higgins still balled out. And T. Higgins proved himself to be a number one receiver. And we knew that coming into the season, right? Coming into the season, we saw that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins were like neck and neck. Since then, obviously, because Jamar Chase has been pretty bad, he's fallen back a little bit in rankings, but not nearly as enough as what I thought, right? But I think we're starting to see now that T. Higgins has overcome his biggest obstacle to becoming a top 24 receiver, which is Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase was the issue, which is why people jumped on him. Now he's gone. Now T. Higgins can fully assume that number one role. And I like it because I like being a part of the Cincinnati offense in a way. Sure. Because if you can make T. Higgins your third receiver, your flex option, you're a part of an offense here that's going to be throwing the ball until the last second of the game because they're going to get their ass kicked week in, week out. And T. Higgins catches a shit ton of passes. He's proven well in the end zone too. He had 6 touchdowns. I mean, nothing like crazy, but off of 108 targets, that's pretty good. And showed a ton of durability last year too. Played all 16 games. I mean, he had a little bit of an injury shakeup, but he played through a lot of it too.
And I mean, you alluded to who was their quarterback last year?
I honestly can't say.
I can't actually remember either.
Yeah, I can't say it on top of my head.
After Burrow went down, and he made a bulk of his.
They had a guy from North Carolina State, I think. Shit, that's gonna.
We're going to look that up, right? But nonetheless, I think with more consistent quarterback play, and hopefully Burrow can come out and be healthy. Man, he is kind of worrying me in this offseason, and I think we both like Joe Burrow a lot, so I certainly want to see him come out and play healthy. But it might take a little bit for this Bengals offense to really get everything together and kind of get in a rhythm. But I think T. Higgins at the end of the season is going to be the guy that we look back and either wish we drafted or wish we at least anticipated having a better season and being higher on draft boards overall.
I mean, projected around 1,000 yards, 80 catches, 6 touchdowns. I mean, he really does fall in that exact category of a Deontay Johnson type of character. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't think he has the breakout value that a Jeudy or like a Brandon Aiyuk does, but I do think he holds extremely high floor, which at that range, at that tier, those are the kind of things you should be looking at because after that top 24, you're not going to see that, I don't think.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it is, we mentioned Jamar Chase, but don't forget about Tyler Boyd either. I mean,
he's still there.
Someone to potentially think about in deeper leagues and PPR leagues to target because
in your 20-man league for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, he still presents a pretty good fantasy value, especially if Jamar Chase doesn't show up at all this season. But nonetheless, man, that caps off the night. There you have it, 13 through 24. It was a blast, man. That's a lot of good conversation. That's a lot of good fantasy football players. That's a lot of good value where you can go out and get these guys. Like I said, a lot of these guys are going to probably suit you better as a wide receiver 2 or filling that flex position. Some of these guys, they're going to prove us wrong, man. They're going to come out and they're going to perform like they are the wide receiver 1 on their respective team. So don't sleep on these guys. Don't sleep on Jerry Jeudy. Don't sleep on Brandon Aiyuk, man. Really go out and look at what you're expecting from your fantasy receivers this year. And a lot of these guys are going to be guys that you want to target. And there are people a little bit further down that didn't make these top 24 that are really good football players, going to have very good fantasy years overall as well. I mean, the receiver position, very deep. Very, very deep.
Very deep.
I don't think there's any argument that it is not the deepest position in fantasy football. So nonetheless, don't panic if you don't go out and get some of these top 24 guys, top 36 guys, however you want to look at it. There's going to be a lot of good late round values. But yeah, I had a blast with that, man. As always, we thank you guys for watching and or listening. We appreciate if you go ahead and smash that like button. And I don't know what you guys are doing if you're not subscribed, man. You need some Steven in your life. You need
a sub, baby. Look at how low my shirt is right now. Give me a sub.
You need some of the catch in your life day in and day out. And as always, drop some comments down below. Let us know what you thought overall of these fantasy projections. Like Steven alluded to earlier, let us know who you think we left off of our top 24, who should be in there, and vice versa. If you hate my Jerry Jeudy pick, if you think someone should not be in this top 24, leave in the comments down below. We are happy to discuss those points with you guys.
We're happy to defend too.
Absolutely, but we also like that feedback. We like to see where people are and their reasonings for having people. Sometimes that is the best feedback you can get in general. Kind of make you think twice about your decisions and everything. So I will hand it over to you, Steven, for any final thoughts that you have on the night.
Yeah, definitely. Let us know who you think we left off. Let us know who you don't like. Let us know who you hate, because I can tell you this right now. If I see any guys on my top 24 that I think could fall off, it's Adam Thielen probably. So let me know what you think, because shoot, our draft hasn't happened yet. I want any sort of advice you can give. We want to be giving you guys the best advice. It's a joint collaboration. The Catch Fam is a huge part of what we do every day. And we eat, sleep, and breathe football, and I know y'all do too. So let's get it, guys.
Absolutely, all day. Shout out to the Catch fam. Shout out to all the subscribers, man. Like Steven said, we're in it for you guys. So let us know what else you guys want to see outside of these ranking videos, these mock drafts. Happy to put it together for you, man. So as always, we thank you for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on the Catch.